Please, please don't do this. Please.
In 2013, the well-respected first-party studio Naughty Dog launched a game on the last-generation hardware titled The Last of Us. The groundbreaking game defied conventional storytelling, exceeded game score expectations, obtaining many impressive game awards, and earned the acclaim of millions who would share their personal stories as to how awe-inspiring the title was for them. In the summer month of July 2014, The Last of Us would receive a remastered version for the current PlayStation 4 generation console, allowing newcomers to experience the game and what made it so special to begin with. 7 years after the initial release, The Last of Us Part 2 would launch, generating positive critic review scores and gaining an incredible 95% on Metacritic. It's safe to say, and while this is purely subjective, that The Last of Us Part 2 is a technical marvel that elevates and perfects narratively complex storytelling, flawless gameplay, and graphical fidelity unparalleled to any video game I've experienced to date. For this review, I'll be breaking down my subjective thoughts of the game and what I think made it one of my favorite PlayStation 4 exclusive games to play, starting with the plot.
I don't know what happened. I was supposed to take her to the Fireflies and walk away. They were actually going to make a cure. The only catch, it would kill her.
5 years after the ending of the first game, Ellie and Joel are both settled in Jackson, Wyoming. This town is ran by Joel's brother, Tommy, as well as Maria, Tommy's wife, whose presence are far more significant in Part 2's story. Jackson is full of life. Kids run around carelessly as residents of the settlement prepare weekly activities to indulge themselves in. The town offers relative peace for our protagonists, Joel and Ellie, who've had such a discomforting journey in Part 1. However, after the selfish end of the first game, that past quickly haunts the Jackson community, and Ellie is forced to seek revenge against those who have robbed Ellie from the one person she loves the most, Joel Miller. The story starts off tragically with the death of Joel, a father figure to Ellie, and a person that is trying to do right for the people he loves most. The haunting imagery of Joel being beaten down by a person he wronged so horribly stuck with me as it did Ellie, and Part 2's brutal introduction mirrors Part 1's emotional introduction. It reinforces the idea that The Last of Us isn't a world or a tale about sunshine and rainbows, but the horrors of surviving everyday life in a terrifying, dystopian, and post-apocalyptic world. Mystery Woman is excellently portrayed by Laura Bailey and later revealed to be Abby, the daughter of the doctor that Joel slaughtered right before rescuing Ellie from being killed in an attempt to generate a cure, which might have not been a successful operation anyhow. This selfish but understandable choice that Joel makes has created many conversations regarding whether or not Joel is the true antagonist in Part 1's story. After Abby tortures and ultimately kills Joel, Ellie embarks on this emotional journey to kill every last one of the people involved in killing him in pursuit of bringing closure. This group is comprised of former Fireflies, which justifies their actions completely. What furthers the narrative and Ellie's emotional distress even more is how each day she comes closer to finding Abby, flashbacks are interrupted to show what happened in past experiences with both Joel and Ellie. These moments of bonding are the greatest I've experienced in any video game, but there's one moment, probably one of the most heartbreaking ones at the time, is when Joel protects Ellie against a bigot in the community of Jackson. Ellie lashes out on Joel, clearly still upset after discovering the truth about what unfolded in the hospital before Joel saves her from dying. Joel rushes off, and at that moment you're led to believe that's the last thing the two ever say to each other. It's not, but the game intentionally paces itself to unveil story bits slowly, building up on the final scene with Joel and Ellie before he's beaten down by Abby. It's by far one of the most impactful scenes in the entire game, and the one that carries so much weight. As you play as Ellie in the first half of the game, you think that both she and Joel had an argument before his death, but it's shown how the two actually made up, and Joel expresses how, if given the chance, he'd redo exactly what he did in the final chapter of the first game. Joel would save Ellie from the Fireflies again. This bond between the two characters is what makes The Last of Us Part 2 so special to me. How even with the death of Joel, Ellie's reminded of how bold and stubborn he was, how much Ellie meant to him, and how much Joel meant to Ellie. How much Joel and Ellie love each other. Ellie's thirst for revenge is warranted because of what these two characters mean to each other. A huge portion of the story revolves around Abby's brute-like character, who shares no remorse for what she did to Joel or the people she put through hell in killing him. Instead, we follow her story as she progresses through Seattle in search of everyday meaning. She's saved by two Seraphite kids who are running away from their oppressive religious group, and later on, Abby dreams about how she essentially left them to die. The last person who saved Abby, she ended up executing. Instead of following that similar violent and evil path, she has a change of heart and goes after the kids who helped save her and ultimately saves their lives. The Last of Us Part 2's plot is accurately detailed and extremely complex. Each facet of it has meaning, whether big or small, it has some significance. These details all exist to help nurture development in order to flesh out the world, and quite honestly, I do think the game works best this way, even though I didn't fully agree with the narrative choices. It's hard to watch one of my favorite video game characters be executed and then be forced to play a huge part of the game as the person responsible for killing that character. No video game has ever challenged that. No video game that I've ever played forced me to establish an intimate point of view perspective by playing as the antagonist, like in this game, even if Abby's motivations are justified. It's these creative choices that, while I didn't and still don't fully support, I think still allows for some nuance in how video games are meant to be played. Even when playing through Abby's parts of the game, I didn't fully feel like she was the respective killer of Joel because the game forces you to feel some sympathy for her, even if it's subtle. Before transitioning to gameplay, I will say that I applaud Neil Druckmann and the entire narrative team, including Haley Gross and Josh Scher, all instrumental in creating this ambitious story, and I'm thrilled that they took risks, even if those risks broke my heart more than once. If there's one defining thing that Naughty Dog does right always, it's the continuous elevation and progress of gameplay systems, gameplay animation, and gameplay iterations. The studio aims for perfection, and in doing so they build upon former gameplay experiences while creating newer ones that feel more firm and stable. The transitioning between Part 1's gameplay and Part 2's is uniquely impressive. The Last of Us Part 1 doesn't make you feel the complete weight of each enemy you kill the way that Part 2 does. This isn't a critique of Part 1's gameplay, which stands well on its own, but a huge compliment to Part 2's improvements. The Last of Us Part 2 carries the tension of its predecessor whilst increasing it tenfold. Part 2 is a horror game. Whether it's the bloody-faced runners who are more frequent, or the loud and vigorously petrifying bloaters who are seemingly reworked to being significantly scarier than in the first game. It's not just the horrifying infected that were molded with depth, but the enemy AR are much smarter and will flank you if you're discovered. Each player has upgrades that will allow for different ways to combat enemies as you go on this journey for revenge. The game grants players the ability to dodge or to go prone, all while making you feel more limber against each warring faction you come across. Part 2's combat is easily one of the best I've encountered, though at times I found this ultra-realistic approach to be less fun to experience at times. When you're shot in The Last of Us Part 2, the weight of the bullet kicks you back, and that's really good on a design perspective, but as a consumer, playing that made me feel less invincible. Still though, the combat is not replaceable, and I think all of the developers who implemented these changes outdid themselves with Part 2. Another worthy aspect of The Last of Us Part 2 is its unbelievably beautiful and alluring, yet traumatizing soundtrack. Returning is breathtaking composer Gustavo Santaolalla, who breathes new life into the powerfully striking track. especially with the likes of Beyond Desolation, Unbroken, and It Can't Last, all tracks which pierce through my heart each time the faint melody plays during moments of performance. Another composer involved this time around is Mac Qualley, responsible for some of the more upbeat and energetic tracks. Both composers are genius and gives The Last of Us Part 2 so much more tone to convey itself with so many of the complex emotional story beats. Part 2's score is heavenly and is by far the most endearing music I've paid attention to in my entire existence. Ultimately, I really enjoyed The Last of Us Part 2. Naughty Dog is a studio who's famous for their gift in storytelling, and Part 2 is no different. While the game went against some story expectations I had, and though I didn't like some of where the plot went, I appreciate its flawless attempt. The Last of Us Part 2 is a story about hate, and the themes of hate, the consequences which follow in carrying out revenge, and what characters will go through to enact justice against those they've been wronged by. This world is beautiful, existing in horror all at the same time. The environments are beyond rich and detailed. The combat and gameplay are generation defining, and the story is an emotionally complex and sometimes frustrating gift. A tale that, although broke my heart, can still and should be appreciated. The Last of Us Part 2 feels slightly disconnected from the first game though, but that's not a bad thing. Love, which is the motif in Part 1, underscores hate in Part 2 by sending a message that forgiveness and love is what conquers at the end, even when walking through the valley of the shadow of death. The Last of Us Part 2 is a harrowing masterpiece, one which deserves time to understand, time to appreciate, and obviously time to play. Well, there you have it, my nearly 2,000 worded review on The Last of Us Part 2 and what I personally thought worked and what I personally thought didn't work. To Naughty Dog, I'm forever moved by your bold storytelling, the elevation of the game, and its graphical beauty and performance capture, to the impressive gameplay design and literally everything in between. My heart still aches, but I'm proud that your company took the risks others wouldn't have dared to. To everyone watching this review, I thank you for your continuous support and kind compliments. I hope that you respect my opinion of this game, and I encourage you to start some discourse in the comment section below. Tell me, did you enjoy The Last of Us Part 2? And if so, what made it so special to you? If not, what made you dislike it? Let me know, and as always, I have been TheStarkz. Peace.